We trust our governments to protect us. But what happens when that trust is shattered by horrific experiments on their own people? This exploration delves into 3 such instances: the HIV Pregnancy Study, the military poison tests, and the MK-Ultra program. The relationship between a government and its citizens hinges on trust. However, governments throughout history have betrayed this trust. These weren't isolated incidents. They were systematic programs with little regard for the human cost. The very notion of a government experimenting on its own people evokes a visceral reaction. These stories challenge our faith in authority, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable reality that power, when left unchecked, can corrupt even the most well-intentioned ideals. The experiments we'll be examining were products of their time, shaped by the prevailing social and political climates. The Cold War justified extreme measures in the name of national security. The dehumanization of marginalized groups made it easier to rationalize using them as test subjects. These cases serve as stark reminders of the importance of vigilance and holding our leaders accountable. The late 1980s and early 1990s were a time of immense fear due to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Pregnant women faced the terrifying reality of passing the virus to their unborn children. AZT, the first antiretroviral drug, showed promise in reducing transmission. However, the high cost of AZT made it inaccessible to many, setting the stage for unethical trials. The stage for these controversial trials was set in Africa, Thailand, and the Dominican Republic. The women recruited were often poor and uneducated, lured by the promise of quality healthcare. The informed consent process was deeply flawed, with many women not fully informed about the risks. This deliberate withholding of potentially life-saving treatment raised serious ethical concerns. The trials were marked by a callous disregard for the well-being of the participants. Women were subjected to invasive procedures without adequate pain relief. The results of these trials were far from conclusive, yet they continued. The voices of these women were largely ignored, their stories buried beneath scientific data. The ethical violations of the HIV pregnancy trials sparked outrage worldwide. The trials were condemned for exploiting vulnerable populations and failing to meet informed consent standards. The physical and emotional toll on the women was immense. The HIV pregnancy trials highlight the urgent need for greater transparency and accountability in medical research. The Cold War was a time of immense paranoia, blurring the lines between right and wrong. One such experiment targeted the unsuspecting citizens of San Francisco. In 1950, the city became a giant petri dish, its inhabitants unwitting subjects in a military experiment. The goal was to simulate a biological attack, but the human cost was ignored. The government watched and waited, more concerned with the effectiveness of their biological weapon than the well-being of the people. For days, the bacteria lingered in the air, an invisible enemy infiltrating homes, schools, and workplaces. The immediate effects were subtle, but for some, the consequences were severe. Hospitals saw a spike in admissions, with patients presenting with mysterious symptoms. The government collected data, indifferent to the human suffering they caused. The bacteria used in the San Francisco experiment, Serratia marcescens, was considered relatively harmless at the time. However, subsequent research revealed it could cause opportunistic infections. The elderly, infants, and those with weakened immune systems were particularly vulnerable. These experiments raised serious ethical questions about the government's role in safeguarding its citizens. For years, the truth about the San Francisco experiment remained buried in classified documents. Investigative journalists pieced together the disturbing truth. In 1976, a Senate committee investigated the CIA's MKUltra program, uncovering a pattern of government overreach and abuse. The public outcry was immediate and fierce, demanding transparency and accountability. Despite the public outcry, the government never fully acknowledged its wrongdoing in the San Francisco experiment. The families of those affected were left to grapple with the long-term consequences. The experiment remains a dark chapter in American history, urging us to question authority and demand transparency. The human mind, a labyrinth of thoughts, emotions, and memories. The CIA, convinced that the Soviets were ahead in mind control techniques, embarked on a twisted quest to weaponize the human mind. MKUltra involved human subjects, real people used as guinea pigs, in a vast and disturbing experiment. From unsuspecting civilians to soldiers, no one was safe from the CIA's reach, their minds vulnerable to the agency's insidious agenda. The tools of torture, drugs, hypnosis, and more. The CIA's quest for mind control knew no ethical boundaries. They employed a horrifying arsenal of techniques, each more devious than the last. At the heart of MKUltra lay a sinister fascination with LSD, a potent psychedelic drug believed to hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the mind. CIA scientists, operating under the assumption that what they were doing was in the best interest of national security, those unsuspecting subjects with the drug, often in massive quantities, observing their reactions with detached curiosity. But LSD was just the tip of the iceberg. MKUltra's toolbox included a macabre array of techniques: hypnosis, electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and even psychological torture. Subjects were subjected to relentless psychological manipulation. Their sense of reality shattered, their minds turned against themselves. Imagine being strapped to a table electrodes attached to your head, your mind bombarded with electric shocks, all in the name of science. This wasn't the stuff of horror movies. This was the chilling reality of MKUltra, a government-sanctioned program where the pursuit of knowledge trumped all moral considerations. The CIA's methods were as varied as they were cruel, each designed to break down the individual, to strip away their sense of self, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation. The human mind, once a source of wonder and creativity, became a battleground in the CIA's twisted game, the consequences of their actions echoing through the lives of their victims for years to come. Midnight climax, depravity in the name of science. As if MKUltra's core premise wasn't disturbing enough, one particularly dark chapter stands out: Operation Midnight Climax. This sub-project, conceived in the shadowy backrooms of the CIA, took the agency's obsession with mind control to a new low, crossing the line from unethical experimentation to outright depravity. Imagine this: CIA safe houses, disguised as brothels, strategically located in San Francisco and New York City. Unsuspecting men, lured in with the promise of a good time, became unwitting participants in a twisted experiment. Dosed with LSD and other mind-altering drugs, their every move observed through two-way mirrors, these men became pawns in the CIA's game. Their sexual encounters recorded and analyzed for any insights they might yield into the nature of human behavior. The sheer audacity of Operation Midnight Climax is staggering. The CIA, operating with taxpayer dollars, created a network of illicit establishments, exploiting vulnerable individuals and violating their privacy in the most egregious ways possible. Their actions, a gross abuse of power, were justified under the guise of national security, the ends somehow justifying the means. Operation Midnight Climax wasn't just about sex and drugs, it was about power and control. The CIA, intoxicated by its own authority, believed it could operate with impunity, its actions beyond reproach. These safe houses, far from being dens of pleasure, were chambers of exploitation, where the CIA's dark fantasies played out on the bodies and minds of unsuspecting victims. Whitey Bulger, a case study in trauma. The human cost of MKUltra is perhaps best illustrated through the story of James Whitey Bulger, the notorious Boston gangster. While Bulger's life of crime is well documented, few know that he was once a subject in the CIA's twisted experiments. In the late 1950s, while serving time in a federal penitentiary, Bulger volunteered for a study that promised to help with his stutter. Little did he know that he was becoming a participant in MKUltra. Over the course of 18 months, Bulger was subjected to a horrific regimen of drug-induced experiments. He was pumped full of LSD and other mind-altering substances. His dosage increased even after he pleaded with the researchers to stop. The experiments had a devastating impact on Bulger. He suffered from terrifying hallucinations, nightmares, and prolonged insomnia. The psychological trauma he endured likely contributed to his descent into a life of violence and crime, a chilling testament to the lasting consequences of MKUltra's cruel legacy. Bulger's case, while extreme, highlights the deeply unethical nature of MKUltra. The CIA, in its relentless pursuit of mind control, showed a shocking disregard for the well-being of its subjects, treating them as expendable assets rather than human beings. The scars of their experiments, both physical and psychological, lingered long after the program was officially terminated, a haunting reminder of the government's capacity for cruelty. The unraveling, exposing the monster. For years, MKUltra remained hidden from public view, its secrets buried deep within the CIA's archives. It wasn't until the mid-1970s, amidst a wave of public scrutiny of intelligence agencies, that the truth began to emerge. A Senate committee led by Senator Frank Church launched an investigation into the CIA's activities, uncovering a pattern of abuse and overreach that shocked the nation. The committee's findings revealed the horrifying extent of MKUltra, the reckless experimentation, the blatant disregard for human rights, and the CIA's desperate attempts to cover up its actions. The public was outraged. The very idea that the government would engage in such unethical and inhumane practices eroded public trust in institutions meant to protect them. However, the CIA, in a calculated act of self-preservation, had destroyed most of the MKUltra files, making a full accounting of the program's activities impossible. This lack of transparency only fueled the public's anger and distrust, leaving many to wonder just how far the CIA had gone in its quest for mind control. MKUltra remains a dark stain on the CIA's legacy, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the seductive allure of secrecy. The program's exposure sparked a national conversation about the ethical boundaries of government research and the need for greater transparency and accountability from intelligence agencies. The erosion of trust. Democracy rests on trust between citizens and their government. It's a social contract where citizens exchange freedoms for security and stability. Government experiments like the HIV study and MKUltra breached that trust, leaving a legacy of suspicion. These were systematic programs sanctioned at high levels. This deception cuts to the core of government legitimacy. How can citizens trust a system that views them as expendable? The erosion of trust has far-reaching consequences. It breeds apathy, fuels conspiracy theories, and undermines faith in institutions. When faith is lost, participation in democracy declines, and society becomes vulnerable to manipulation. The shadow of history. Government experiments represent only a fraction of the abuses perpetrated in the name of progress or security. From the Tuskegee syphilis study to Nazi medical experiments, history is replete with examples of governments exploiting their power. These atrocities remind us of the fragility of human rights and the ease with which ethical boundaries can be crossed. The shadow of history serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. We must remain vigilant, hold our leaders accountable, and demand transparency. The fight for human rights and dignity is an ongoing struggle, requiring constant effort and commitment. The desire for progress is a fundamental human drive. It's what has propelled us forward from the wheel to space exploration. But progress without ethics can lead to horrors. Government experiments show the dangers of unchecked ambition. The price of progress can be steep. How much are we willing to sacrifice? We must not turn a blind eye to suffering. The answer must be no. Progress at the expense of dignity is no progress at all. Ethical dilemmas are not just for governments. We all face ethical choices. We must consider the ethical implications of our actions. Progress must go hand in hand with ethics, foster a culture of empathy and accountability, encourage critical thinking and challenge assumptions. The future depends on navigating ethics with wisdom and compassion. In the aftermath of these shocking revelations, the question arises, how do we prevent such abuses from happening again? Transparency and accountability must be paramount. The government must be held accountable for its actions. This includes declassifying documents and conducting thorough investigations. Only through a full accounting of the past can we hope to rebuild trust. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with each and every one of us. We must remain vigilant in defending human rights and holding our leaders accountable. We've journeyed through some of the darkest chapters in the history of government experimentation: the HIV Pregnancy Study, the military poison tests, and the MK Ultra program. Each case reveals a chilling disregard for human life and dignity. These weren't isolated incidents. They were calculated decisions, often made at the highest levels of power, to exploit the vulnerable, to silence dissent, and to operate in the shadows, shielded from accountability. But amidst the darkness, there's a glimmer of hope. The exposure of these atrocities sparked outrage, ignited debate, and forced a reckoning with the ethical boundaries of government power. We owe it to the victims, to ourselves, and to future generations to learn from the mistakes of the past. The stories we've explored are not just about the past. They are about the present and the future. They serve as a stark reminder that power, unchecked, corrupts, that the very institutions designed to protect us can become instruments of oppression, that the price of liberty is indeed eternal vigilance. The responsibility for safeguarding human rights, for ensuring that the government acts ethically and transparently, rests not just with those in power, but with each and every one of us. We must remain vigilant in demanding accountability, in questioning authority, and in speaking out against injustice wherever we see it. We must cultivate a society that values transparency, that cherishes dissent, and that recognizes the inherent dignity of every human being. A society where the pursuit of knowledge is guided by ethical principles, where the ends never justify the means, and where the well-being of the people is always paramount. The road ahead is long, and the fight for justice is never truly over. But by learning from the mistakes of the past, by holding our leaders accountable, and by never relinquishing our own power to question and to dissent, we can create a future where the horrors of government experimentation are relegated to the history books, where the sacred trust between citizens and their government is restored, and where the inherent dignity of every human being is respected and protected.